My dear. The last time I saw her, we were laughing so hard. We nearly spilled iced tea on Mama's quilt. We'd made a promise, right there under the wisteria vines, to grow old together, to be the kind of friends who knew every line on each other's faces and still called them beautiful. Then one day she was just gone. No fight. No letter. Not even a shadow of goodbye. For 20 years, I've carried the silence she left behind, wondering what I did, or didn't do to make her leave. If you enjoy stories like these, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd subscribe, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Sometimes it helps knowing who's out there sharing the silence. Now let me take you back to where it all started. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name in handwriting that stopped my breath mid-sip of morning coffee. I hadn't seen those loops and curves in 2 decades. Hadn't dared imagine them on anything but the back of old photographs I kept hidden in a cedar box under my bed. Ellie, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm finally brave enough to come back. I didn't open it right away. I sat there in my sunroom, holding that envelope like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. Outside, the roses I planted the summer she left were blooming again. Same time every year, like they never got the memo she was gone. But inside, something cracked open. Not like a wound, but a door. One I'd kept bolted for 20 years. And behind it was a summer I never thought I'd speak of again. It was the clink of wind chimes that pulled me back. I'd been standing in the kitchen, barefoot, the linoleum cool against my arches, when I heard them. Those delicate brass ones shaped like willow leaves. She gave them to me on my 42nd birthday, said they'd catch the truth on the wind. I never knew what she meant. Not back then. But that morning, they rang out sharp and sudden, even though the air was still. I turned toward the porch, heart skittish like a rabbit in clover, and there it was, that letter. The moment I touched it, I felt 20 years younger. And not in the good way. Not wrinkle-free and laughing in the garden. No, younger like I was undone again. Shaky, uncertain, haunted by a question I'd buried so deep it had roots in my bones. Why did you leave me, Lena? Her name still tasted like summer peaches and wood smoke. She was my sister by soul, if not by blood. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and make the candles flicker, even when there was no draft. We met when we were 16. Promised to be each other's person, long before folks started calling it that. And then one day, she was gone. No argument. No funeral. No warning. She left behind her teacup, her sweater draped over the porch swing, and 1,000 questions that never got asked. Over the years, I made peace with the silence. Or so I thought. But the moment I opened that letter, I realized something. I hadn't just been waiting for answers. I'd been waiting for her. Lena. My hands trembled as I read her words. And when I finished, I looked out across the backyard where we once chased fireflies and whispered dreams under a borrowed moon. Everything was quiet. But something was coming. We met in the summer of 1974, the kind of summer that pressed its heat into your skin and never let go. I remember because the icebox in Mama's house went out that week, and everything started to sour. The milk, the leftovers, the tempers. But somehow Lena made it all feel sweet again. She'd moved to Charleston from Savannah, staying with her great-aunt in a weathered seafoam green house down on Juniper Street. That house always smelled like lemons and turpentine, and I remember thinking it suited her, tart and sharp, but strangely comforting. We were both 16, both bookish, both hiding our heartaches in notebooks. I had just lost my daddy that spring, and she carried secrets in her eyes that I wouldn't come to understand until much later. The first time we spoke, it was over a dropped library book. Mine. Wuthering Heights. It tumbled from my arms right as she passed by the courthouse steps, where I'd been too focused on a cicada's buzz to notice her shadow approaching. She picked it up, ran her thumb along the edge like she was reading the binding before handing it back. You believe in ghosts? She asked, squinting at me. I blinked, unsure. In books or in real life? She smiled, one side of her mouth rising like the tide. Both. And just like that, I was caught. From then on, we were inseparable. Two Southern girls trying to outrun the heat and our mother's expectations. We spent our days wandering Battery Park, skipping stones off the seawall, scribbling poems on napkins, and dreaming of far-off places we'd never seen. She had this way of talking, soft and hypnotic, like a jazz record on low volume. She made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. And maybe that's why I loved her. Long before I had the language to name it, I loved her. But I never said it out loud. Neither did she. We built a whole world out of glances and half-spoken truths. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of the end. That summer turned into fall, and life kept on in that sleepy Charleston rhythm. School, chores, church on Sundays. But we carved out time like rebels. We made Sunday night our ritual. Iced coffee, old records, and secret letters we wrote but never mailed. We called them our someday truths. Things we couldn't say aloud, so we wrote them down instead. Folded, dated, hidden in the old hollow of the willow tree by the river. One day, she said, we'll be old and wrinkled and sitting in rocking chairs, and we'll dig these up and laugh at how scared we used to be. I believed her. With everything in me. Then came the summer of '79. And everything changed. The summer of '79 started like every other, with the scent of magnolias heavy in the air, and the cicadas screaming like they knew secrets we didn't. But there was something under it that year. A tension, like the tide pulling a little too far out. We were 21 by then. Both of us still living at home, saving money, waiting for something to change, though we couldn't say exactly what. Lena had taken a job at the bakery on Meeting Street, while I worked mornings at the town library. We still met every Sunday night, still wrote our someday truths, but the space between us had started to shift. It began when Lena started seeing Peter Caldwell. Now Peter was a nice enough boy. The kind with a square jaw and a nervous laugh. He'd gone to school with us, but we never paid him much mind until he came back from college with a shiny car and stories about Atlanta. Lena told me it was casual. He's just a distraction, she said, biting her straw while we watched the boats drift at Shem Creek. You ever need one of those? I said no. But the truth was, she'd always been my distraction. I didn't like Peter. Not because he was unkind, but because he took up space in her life that had always belonged to me. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding foolish or worse, possessive. I tried to hide it. Smiled when she talked about him. Laughed when she joked about his terrible taste in music. But I felt the shift, in her eyes, in her timing, in how she sometimes forgot to show up on Sundays. Then one evening, she didn't come at all. I waited under the willow for hours. A thermos of iced coffee turning warm in my lap, the cicadas quiet for once. When I went to see her the next day, her aunt said she was out, and didn't know when she'd be back. She's been unsettled lately, she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Restless. Like her mother used to be. That word, restless, stayed with me. By the end of August, she was gone more often than she was around. I started writing my letters alone. Placing them in the tree even though I wasn't sure she'd ever read them again. Then one night, out of nowhere, she showed up at my window. It was after midnight. I still remember the moonlight on her cheeks, the way her hair looked wild and windblown. She tapped the glass, urgent, eyes wide with something I couldn't name. Come with me, she whispered. I didn't ask why. I grabbed my shoes and followed her down the street, past the marsh, to the old boathouse where we used to play as kids. Inside, it smelled of salt and wood rot. She sat down on the floor, pulled out a folded paper, one of our someday truths. I lied, she said, not meeting my eyes. About Peter. About everything. My heart thudded so loud I thought it might drown out her words. She held the paper to the lantern flame, watched it curl and vanish. I don't know who I am anymore, Elle, she whispered. But I know I'm not who I'm supposed to be, if I stay here. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it for a moment. Then she let go. That was the last time I saw her. 2 days later, she was gone. No goodbye. No letter. Just vanished. And now, 20 years later, her handwriting had returned to my porch. The letter sat on the kitchen table for nearly 3 days before I could bear to touch it again. I moved it from place to place, from the counter to the sideboard, to the windowsill by my rocking chair, like it was a guest I didn't quite know how to welcome. Muffin, my cat, sniffed it once, then gave it a suspicious swat, as if to say, don't trust what you can't see coming. I understood the warning. But curiosity, that old ghost, wouldn't let me rest. On the third night, just past midnight, I turned on the porch light and sat with a glass of sweet tea and my fear. The letter trembled slightly in my hands as I unfolded it. There were only a few lines. Ellie, if you're reading this, then I'm finally brave enough to come back. I know I don't deserve anything. Not your forgiveness, not your time. But there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago. I'll be at the place where the truth was always safe. Sunday at 6. If you don't come, I'll understand. Elle. The place where the truth was always safe. I didn't need to think twice. The willow tree. It was still there, standing guard beside the river like an old sentinel. I hadn't been back in years. Not since a hurricane nearly pulled it down. But it stayed stubborn as ever, like it knew its purpose wasn't finished. Sunday came with a nervous sky, clouds thick and bruised, heat clinging to everything. I dressed simply, linen blouse, slacks, sandals, and told myself I was going for closure, not comfort. As I pulled up near the trail, I noticed a blue sedan parked just off the dirt road. No license plate on the front. Dust-covered windows. My pulse quickened. I walked the path slow, heart loud, every crunch of gravel echoing through me like a countdown. When I reached the willow, she wasn't there. Only a folded blanket on the ground. And a small tin box resting on top, the one we used to keep our letters in. I crouched down, breath shallow, and opened it. Inside were the someday truths I thought we'd both forgotten. Mine. Hers. Some I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. Others new. Dated years after she disappeared. One from 1986. One from 1991. One from 1999, the year my mother died. Each in her handwriting. Each sealed. And on top of them all, a note. Ellie, I couldn't face you just yet. But I've been here. Watching. Waiting. I never stopped missing you. Please read them. Then, if your heart still allows it, come find me. Start with the one dated August 29th, 1983. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. That was the week she left. The one with all the answers, or so I thought. August 29th, 1983. The envelope was thin but heavy. Heavy with time. Heavy with the weight of everything we never said. I sat down under the willow tree, just as we used to, and opened it. Inside was a letter written in ink that had faded, but not enough to blur the emotion behind it. Ellie, I'm writing this on the morning I leave, though you won't read it until long after. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I couldn't stay. Not because of you, never because of you. But because of who I am when I'm with you. I see myself too clearly, and it terrifies me. Loving you was the most natural thing I ever did. But I didn't know how to live in a world where I could say it out loud. Peter was never real. He was my shield. My excuse. A way to keep people from asking questions I wasn't brave enough to answer. But you were real. And I loved you. I still do. If I had stayed, I would have ruined it. I would have clung too tight, broken something precious. So I left to protect you. Even if it broke me. Please believe that. Lena, I sat there for a long time, her words echoing like wine through dry leaves. She had loved me. And I had loved her. But fear, that old thief, had stolen what we were too afraid to name. I read the other letters, one by one. In 1986, she'd gone to New Mexico. Tried to build a life as a painter. Fell in love with the desert skies but couldn't shake the ghost of Charleston. In 1991, she was living out of her car in Oregon. Said she spent most nights dreaming of sweet tea and jazz records. Of me. In 1999, she wrote after hearing Mama passed. I almost came to the funeral, she wrote. I stood behind the oaks at the edge of the cemetery, watched you cry, and hated myself for every mile between us. Each letter stitched a picture I'd never seen, of a woman unraveling and rebuilding, over and over, always with my name tucked somewhere in the seams. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt hollowed out, like part of me had been missing for 20 years, and now had to relearn how to feel whole again. The last note gave an address. A cottage in Edisto by the marshes. I'll be there every Sunday. If one day I see you walking up the path, I'll know it's time to stop running. I folded the letters back into the tin and placed it gently beneath the roots of the willow. Then I stood, the sky above me beginning to break into light. And I made a decision. The drive to Edisto took a little over 2 hours, but time felt strange that day, like it was holding its breath. I took the old highway, the one that winds past cotton fields and rusted-out tractors, the one she and I used to joke led straight to nowhere. I hadn't been down that way in years. Not since my children were young and still thought of sand as treasure and seashells as secrets. As I passed the old peach stand, long since boarded up, I found myself reaching for the volume knob on the radio. Jazz. Just soft enough not to interrupt my thoughts, but steady enough to keep my heart from galloping off the edge of my ribs. When I turned down the gravel path toward the marsh, my fingers tightened around the wheel. The cottage was small, barely visible through the moss-draped oaks. White clapboard, blue shutters, an empty rocking chair on the porch. I parked slowly, sat there with the engine ticking, and stared at the door. Would she be there? Would she run? Would I? I didn't knock. I couldn't. I walked down to the marsh, to the rickety little dock that jutted out like a finger pointing at the horizon. That's where I found her. Lena. She stood at the edge, bare feet on sun-warmed planks, staring out at the water like it could answer her. Her hair had silvered, same as mine. But the way she held herself, that stillness, that soft strength, hadn't changed a bit. She didn't turn around when she spoke. I wasn't sure you'd come. My throat tightened. I wasn't either. She turned then, slowly, carefully, like the moment might shatter. Her eyes met mine. There it was. 20 years of silence, undone in an instant. And yet, nothing was simple. Nothing ever is. I walked toward her, unsure if I wanted to embrace her or demand the kind of answers no letter could give. She stepped back slightly, just enough to let the wind pass between us. I thought about you every day, she said. I nodded. And still you left. Her mouth trembled. I thought I was doing the right thing. But it wasn't your choice to make, I said, the word sharper than I intended. We stood there, the marsh murmuring beneath us, and let the pain settle like silt. I was in love with you, I said finally. I know, she whispered. And you loved me. I still do. My breath caught. But I can't pretend these years didn't happen. That you didn't walk away when I needed you most. That you weren't there when Mama died, or when I got sick, or, she reached for me, but I stepped back. I'm not here to rewrite the past, Lena, I said. I came because I needed to see your face when I said these things out loud. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I don't know if I have it to give. Silence again. But this time, it felt like soil, like something could grow from it. The wind picked up, sending the marsh grass into a slow, mournful dance. Lena sat down at the edge of the dock, pulling her knees to her chest the way she used to when we were girls. Like she could fold herself small enough to disappear. I wanted to come back so many times, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But every time I tried, I'd hear Mama's voice in my head. The shame. The fear. You know how it was back then. I did. In 1983, two women loving each other wasn't just complicated, it was dangerous. It was whispered about behind closed doors, prayed against in church pews. It was something you buried, deep, beneath layers of polite smiles and quiet suffering. But that didn't mean it didn't exist. I lowered myself down beside her, the wood creaking under our weight. You think I wasn't scared too? I asked. She turned to me, eyes shining. I know you were. But you were always braver than me. No, I said. I just stayed because I didn't know how to run. Lena looked out at the horizon. After I left, I tried to erase it. I moved, changed jobs, changed names. I even got engaged once. But I never stopped writing you those letters. I never stopped dreaming of this place. Of you. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. Then why now? After all this time? She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded pamphlet. A hospice logo peeked out from the corner. I froze. Lena. She nodded. Stage 4. Liver. The words hit like thunder. I didn't come back to start over, she said. I came back because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world without facing you. without telling the truth. My body went still. Every old hurt, every scar, every unsent letter seemed to hum inside me at once. And what is the truth? I asked. She looked at me then, fully, deeply, in a way she hadn't since we were 21. That I've only ever had one great love, she said. And it was you. Tears came, soft and soundless. I didn't speak. Instead, I leaned into her shoulder, and for the first time in 2 decades, we sat in silence together. Not as strangers, not as ghosts, but as 2 women bound by something neither time nor fear could erase. She rested her head against mine. I'm tired, she whispered. I know. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of gold and lavender. The water shimmered with memory. And I knew then whatever came next would not be easy, but it would be true. Lena moved into my guest room that same week. I didn't even ask. I just brought down the quilts, washed the old pine floors, and cleared space on the dresser like I'd been waiting all these years without realizing it. The first few days passed in a strange rhythm, part hospice, part homecoming. There were pills to sort, soups to warm, and memories to tiptoe around like broken glass. She brought only one suitcase and a small wooden box filled with paints and brushes, though she no longer had the strength to use them. Some nights, she cried out in her sleep. Other times, she'd wake and sit on the edge of the bed, tracing the patterns in the wallpaper, whispering stories half-finished from years ago. I sat with her most nights, held her hand when the tremors started, let her lean on me when her legs gave way. But there were cracks in me too, places she couldn't see. One night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, reading one of her old letters again, the one from 1991. She'd written it from a motel near the Oregon coast. There's a part of me that still believes I'll walk into a room and find you there. No questions. No anger. Just your soft voice saying, "You took your time." I folded it, pressed it to my chest, and cried until dawn, because I wasn't sure I could ever give her that version of me. And then came the breaking point. It was a Thursday afternoon. She was resting in the sunroom, a quilt across her lap, when my daughter, Rose, stopped by with her 2 boys. Rose didn't know Lena. Not really. She remembered her as a name spoken in caution, in whispers, the friend who vanished, the absence that shaped my silence. And I'd never told her the full truth. Never felt I could. But children see through things. And Rose had always been sharp. She stood in the doorway, watching Lena sleep, and then looked at me. "Is she the reason you never remarried?" she asked quietly. I felt the air go still. I nodded. "She broke your heart, didn't she?" "Yes," I whispered, and gave it meaning. Rose blinked fast, nodded once, and turned away. That evening, Lena sensed the tension. "She knows," she said gently, her voice thin. She guessed. Lena took a slow breath. "I don't want to cause more damage." "It's too late for that," I said, sharper than I meant. She flinched. I stood, needing space, pacing the kitchen like the floor might give me answers. "You were my everything, Lena. And you left me with nothing but questions. And now you come back with this sickness, this ending, and expect me to hold it all again." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I snapped. "Over and over. And now I'm supposed to what? Watch you fade away and call it closure." She looked away, silent. The room pulsed with everything unsaid. Then, in a voice barely above breath, she said, "I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back to give you a chance to say goodbye." That broke something in me. I turned, pressed my hands to the counter, and wept. 'Cause even now, I wasn't ready to lose her. That night, the house felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the weight of everything finally spoken. I didn't go back to the sunroom. I needed space, time, silence, things I used to fill with her absence. Now that she was here, every breath felt like borrowed air. I slept on the couch, or tried to. At some point, the floor creaked behind me. I turned, expecting her frail silhouette. But it was Rose. She had let herself in with the old key. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, wrapping my cardigan tighter around her. Neither of us turned on the light. "She looks happy," Rose whispered, sitting beside me. "Even sick. She looks lighter than I remember." "She carried too much for too long," I said. Rose studied me. "And you? I shook my head. I never stopped carrying it. She reached over, took my hand. I don't understand all of it, she said. But I want to. When you're ready. It was the first time my daughter had looked at me not as a mother, but as a woman with a past she wasn't part of, and didn't try to claim. The next morning, I returned to the sunroom. Lena was awake, eyes fixed on the sky. I thought maybe you wouldn't come back, she said. I sat beside her, rested my hand over hers. You were wrong before, I said. You said you didn't come back to be forgiven, but maybe you should have. She blinked slowly. I don't know if I can forgive everything, I went on. But I want to try. Because holding it all, it's killing me faster than the years ever did. Lena turned to me, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. I missed your voice, she said. You had it, I whispered. In every letter I never sent. From that day on we moved gently with each other, like two people crossing an old rope bridge step by step. We sat in the garden most mornings. I read aloud to her in the evenings, poetry mostly. She loved Audre Lorde. Sometimes she'd fall asleep mid-stanza, and I'd sit there watching her breathe, trying to memorize the shape of each exhale. But time as it does moved forward. Her body weakened. The days grew shorter. One evening she woke from a nap, eyes wide and scared. Promise me something, she said, voice shaking. Anything. When I go, don't keep writing letters to ghosts. Write them to the living. I nodded, tears spilling. And Ellie? Yes. Tell them the truth. That night, I opened our old tin box again. And I started writing. But this time, the story wasn't just for her. It was for all the pieces of myself I'd hidden. Lena passed quietly on a Sunday morning. There was no drama to it. No final gasp or dramatic confession. Just a stillness, so complete it felt holy. I'd stepped into the kitchen to warm her tea, and when I returned, her eyes were closed, her chest no longer rising. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood, but I didn't flinch. I walked to her side, sat down on the edge of the bed, and took her hand. It was still warm. She'd left with the morning light kissing her cheeks, the scent of my lavender soap still on the sheets. That mattered to me. That she hadn't been alone. That her last view of the world was this little room filled with soft things and someone who loved her. I didn't cry right away. Grief is strange that way. It doesn't follow a clock or a rule. It creeps up in the sound of the kettle, in the quiet of the laundry room. It clings to the places where voices used to echo. The hospice nurse came, gentle and slow-moving, like she understood the sacredness of the air. She said all the right things, helped me make the calls. Rose arrived an hour later, children in tow. She hugged me first. Then she walked into the sunroom, stood at Lena's side, and whispered something I couldn't hear. The boys asked if the lady was sleeping. I nodded. Later, Rose helped me change the sheets, wrap the quilt, fold her nightgown. We didn't speak much, but there was peace in the silence. That evening, after the coroner had gone, after the sun had dipped behind the marsh, I sat alone with the tin box. I lit a candle and opened one last letter. It was dated the day before she died. Ellie, if you're reading this, I've already stepped into whatever comes next. I hope it's soft. You gave me more than forgiveness. You gave me the ending I never thought I deserved. I don't want you to mourn me like you did before, in silence and secrecy. I want you to speak, to tell our story the way we lived it. Tender, messy, half-true and wholehearted. Promise me. Love always, Elle. I closed the letter, heart thrumming with sorrow and strange relief. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with Muffin curled beside me, the wind catching the wind chimes she gave me so long ago. They rang steady and true, a new kind of truth. The funeral was small, just a scattering of us under the wide live oak in my backyard. The same tree where we used to string up lanterns and sip sweet wine in our youth, dreaming about lives we didn't yet understand. I didn't put an obituary in the paper. Lena wouldn't have wanted that. But I did call the names I knew she carried. A woman from Oregon who had once let her sleep in her garden shed. A bookstore owner in Taos who still had one of Lena's watercolors pinned behind the register. Rose sat beside me through it all, her hand in mine. And when it came time to speak, I stood. I hadn't prepared anything. Couldn't. But the words came anyway, like they'd been waiting their whole lives for breath. She was my best friend, I said, voice shaking. And the love of my life. And I lost her twice. Once to fear. Once to time. There were no gasps. No judgments. Just stillness. Maybe that's what honesty does. Quiets a room because there's nothing left to hide. Later, as people trickled away, Rose lingered behind. She helped me gather the folding chairs, wiped the dew from the card table. Then she turned to me, her face unreadable. "I'm proud of you," she said. I swallowed hard. "You've lived with this story inside you for too long," she continued. "You deserve to speak it." That night, I found a stack of fresh journals on my kitchen table. No note. Just clean, blank pages waiting. The first entry I wrote wasn't about Lena's death. It was about our laughter. The way we'd once danced barefoot in the rain behind the Piggly Wiggly. How we sang Patsy Cline off-key on late-night drives to nowhere. How she once told me that loving someone in secret doesn't make it less real. It just makes it heavier. And I wrote about the weight. Because grief doesn't just bury the dead. It exhumes the living. Makes you hold every piece of who you were and ask, did I love fully? Did I speak the truth? I hadn't. Not until now. But I was ready. Ready to be the woman who writes to the living. Who tells the truth. Not just for Lena. But for the girl I used to be. Grief, when it settles, doesn't always wail. Sometimes it just rearranges the furniture. In the weeks that followed Lena's passing, I found myself walking through the house like it had been slightly tilted in the night, familiar but strange. Her teacup still rested on the windowsill. Her slippers tucked neatly by the bed. The faint scent of her lotion, lavender and cedar, still lingered in the air like a memory that hadn't yet faded. I wasn't crying much. But I wasn't breathing quite right either. People called. Brought pies. Left flowers on the porch. Most didn't ask questions. Just nodded, hugged, told me she was a special friend. I let them think what they would. The truth, after all, doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be lived. But inside something was shifting. I found myself going through old photo albums, tracing the edges of youth with aching fingers. There we were. Arms looped around each other on the beach, confetti in our hair one New Year's Eve. Laughing so hard in one shot that Lena's eyes had nearly disappeared behind her smile. I stopped on one photo, grainy and sun-drenched, where she was looking at me, not the camera. And I realized something I'd never let myself see before. She'd always loved me out loud. It was I who had whispered. I closed the album, and the silence pressed against my chest like a weight I could no longer carry. So I walked. Every morning, just after sunrise, I slipped on my walking shoes and took to the neighborhood. Past the church with the cracked bell. Past the river where the willow still stood. Past memories I hadn't visited in years. One morning, I found myself at the old library, the one where I'd worked summers in college. Inside, not much had changed. Still smelled of paper and lemon polish. A young girl with purple braids sat behind the desk. "You looking for anything special, ma'am?" I opened my mouth, unsure. Then I said, "I think I might be." And I meant it. I started volunteering at the library on Tuesdays, just shelving books at first. Then helping with the children's story hour. Then organizing the poetry readings on Thursday nights. I didn't tell anyone about Lena. Not right away. But I found myself choosing the poems she loved, the ones she used to read aloud on long car rides. Her voice soft and low like a secret. One afternoon, while reshelving a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe, I caught my reflection in the glass cabinet by the back wall. Snow-white hair pulled back, half-moon glasses perched at the bridge of my nose. The same rose-colored birthmark on my cheek Lena used to trace with her thumb when she thought I was sleeping. I stared for a long time. Not because I was mourning, but because I saw someone I hadn't met before. A woman no longer waiting for life to ask permission. That evening, I pulled out a fresh journal from the stack Rose had given me. I lit a candle, Lena's favorite, sandalwood and fig, and I wrote the title on the first page. Things I've never said out loud. It wasn't a list. Not really. More like a slow unraveling. I wrote about the first time I knew I loved her. A Tuesday afternoon when she tucked a wildflower behind my ear and said I looked like something that belonged to the earth. I wrote about the ache I carried all those years after she left. the dreams, the anger, the hope that refused to die. And then I wrote something that surprised even me. I wrote, I was afraid to be fully seen. Not because of what Lena might have seen, but because of what I might have. In loving her, I'd glimpsed a version of myself that was whole, not in spite of my fears but through them. And I'd turned away. Now, in the hush of a quiet house filled with fading light and memory, I was turning back. That night, as I curled into bed alone, I whispered aloud for the first time, I loved you. I still do. And I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. The room was silent. But I swear, the wind chimes stirred. And I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. In the months that followed, I stopped counting days by grief and began marking them by growth. It didn't happen in grand ways. There was no dramatic healing moment, no thunderclap revelation. Just small things, quiet things. The kind of things Lena always noticed. How the camellias opened early that year. How the wind changed directions before the rain. I kept writing. Every morning before sunrise, I'd make a pot of tea, light a candle, and open my journal. It became a ritual, not of mourning but of reckoning. A way to meet myself without disguise. I wrote letters too. To my son, to Rose. To the friends who always sensed something behind my smile and never pried. I didn't explain everything, but I told enough. Most responded with love. A few with confusion. One or two with silence. But I was learning that not every silence needed to be feared. One morning in early spring, I got a letter in the mail, not handwritten, but typed on soft cream paper. No return address, but I recognized the font. Dear Miss Whitford, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Ruthie, Lena's niece. I was 6 when she disappeared, but I remember her smile, her paintings, and the way she always smelled like peppermint and turpentine. She used to send me postcards from wherever she landed, New Mexico, Oregon, Maine. Always with a little sketch on the back. She told me once, I left my heart in Charleston. I never knew what she meant. Until I found your name in her journal. Thank you for loving her. And for giving her peace in the end. If you ever want to meet, I'd be honored to bring some of her paintings home to you. Warmly, Ruthie Emerson. I clutched the letter to my chest, heart trembling in that old, familiar way, not from fear, but recognition. Lena had told someone. She hadn't erased me after all. I wrote back the next day, told Ruthie I'd love to meet, told her about the wind chimes, the willow tree, and how Lena had changed my life not once, but twice, first by leaving and then by coming home. A week later, Ruthie arrived. Ruthie arrived on a Saturday, just as the rain let up. She stepped out of a dusty hatchback, tall and slender, with wild curls tucked beneath a rain-soaked scarf. She held a canvas portfolio under one arm and a box in the other. The kind of box you carry with both reverence and weight. When she reached my porch, she paused. I wasn't sure you'd really want to see me, she said. I do, I said simply. You're part of her. She smiled, crooked, just like Lena's, and followed me inside. I made tea. She set the box on the kitchen table. These are some of her paintings, she said, opening it slowly. The ones she never sold. The ones she kept for herself, I think. The first canvas took my breath. It was a portrait of me. Not literal, not posed, but unmistakably me. The slope of my shoulders, the line of my jaw, the blue cardigan I used to wear on chilly mornings. Beneath it, she'd written only 2 words. Still here. Tears came without shame. Ruthie looked at me gently. She painted that the week after you found her at the dock. Said she didn't know how else to tell you she saw you. All of you. There were more. Abstract bursts of color that mirrored the marsh at dusk, delicate sketches of the willow tree, a series of watercolors titled Letters I Never Sent. And at the bottom of the box, tucked between 2 canvases, was a sealed envelope. Addressed to me. In her hand. I opened it carefully. Ellie, if Ruthie found her way to you, then I can rest easy knowing some part of me came home twice. Thank you for letting me live inside your memory all these years. Even when it hurt, even when it kept you from breathing freely. Now I hope you'll let me live in your joy too. In your garden, in your music, in your laughter. You have so much life left, my love. Don't tuck it away in boxes like I did. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself be held. Still yours, Lena. I folded the letter, hands trembling. Ruthie didn't speak. She didn't need to. We sat in silence, side by side, while the rain returned, soft and steady, like a benediction. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting. I felt like I was beginning. Spring passed slowly that year, in the way that healing does. Not in leaps, but in the quiet return of color to the trees. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt full. Not of ghosts, but of presence. The kind that lingers when you've finally said the thing you've needed to say for decades. I hung one of Lena's paintings above the mantel. The one she titled Still Here. I wanted to see it each morning. Not as a monument to what we lost, but as proof that love, real love, doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. Ruthie became a regular visitor. Sometimes she brought her partner, a kind woman named Elise with calloused hands and a laugh like birdsong. They helped me plant a new bed of roses in the backyard. And when they bloomed in June, I whispered each name aloud to the wind. One was pink and soft and opened slow. I named it Lena. Rose and I grew closer, too. Something unspoken had settled between us. Not a wall, but a bridge. She brought me her old journals one day, the ones she started in college. Thought you might understand these better now, she said. And I did. She had questions. I answered what I could. Told her stories I'd never dared to tell. About how Lena and I first danced under the stars at the summer fair. How we kissed only once and never spoke of it. How fear made cowards of both of us. Rose listened. And then she said, I'm sorry you had to carry all that alone. I smiled through tears. I'm not carrying it alone anymore. One evening in early July, I hosted a poetry night at the library. The turnout was small, but warm. Friends. Neighbors. A few curious teenagers. I read a piece I'd written, a letter to Lena, but not in mourning. In celebration. After, a woman approached me. Maybe 50. Quiet eyes. She took my hand and whispered, Thank you. For speaking it. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. That night, I sat on my porch, wind chimes singing soft above me, and wrote in my journal. I loved her in silence for most of my life. But now I love her out loud. In late August, I received a small package in the mail. It was from the gallery in Taos where Lena once left behind a watercolor of the Charleston skyline. A piece she'd never signed, just titled Home, still in the corner. The gallery owner wrote that someone had recently purchased it, then changed their mind and returned it. She said it belonged somewhere it could be felt, not just seen. The note read. I hung it in the entryway. Now everyone who steps through my door knows. Not just that she was real, but that we were. That fall, I started leading a small writing group at the community center. Just women, mostly over 50, some with stories they hadn't shared in decades. We wrote about love, about loss, about the ache of being invisible and the power of being seen. One evening, a woman named Marjorie read a piece about a girl she kissed behind a church gymnasium in 1962. She hadn't told a soul until that night. When she finished, she looked at me and said, You made it feel safe. I thought of Lena, of her voice on the dock. I don't want to be forgiven. I want to be known. And maybe in some way that's what we all want. I still write her letters. I keep them in the old tin box under my bed, beside the ones we wrote as girls. Some are short, just a memory, a scent, a moment. Others are longer. I tell her about the roses, the poetry nights, the way the marsh glows just before the tide turns. I tell her I miss her. But not the way I used to. Not with desperation. With gratitude. I miss her like I missed the summer after a long winter. With the knowing that it changed me, shaped me, and that its warmth still lives somewhere inside. And on the quietest nights when the wind moves just right, I swear I can hear her in the chimes. Still here. Still mine. Last Sunday I visited the willow tree again. The roots have deepened, and the trunk has thickened with age, but the hollow is still there. The one where we once slipped folded truths into the dark, believing they'd hold. I brought one last letter. Not sealed. Not hidden. I placed it gently inside the hollow, pressed flat against the curve of the bark. Lena. I kept the promise. I told the truth. You are part of my story, not in the margins but in the center. You were the ache and the answer. And though time took your voice, it gave me mine. I am no longer waiting to be known. I am already seen. With love always, Ellie. I sat on the riverbank for a while after that, listening to the sounds of late summer. The hum of insects, the distant laughter of children, the slow hush of water brushing against stone. Muffin curled beside me, purring like a lullaby. And for the first time in decades I felt whole. Not because I'd erased the grief, but because I'd let it bloom. If we promise to be friends forever, grow old together. Until she left me with no reason and disappeared 20 years ago, opened something quiet in your soul. My dear, I'd love to know what stayed with you. Leave me a note below. Share it with someone who might be walking the same road. And subscribe if you'd like to sit for another tale one day soon. Some stories don't ask to be resolved. They ask to be remembered. Until next time, Ellie.